When the HOA president kept blocking my driveway with her Lexus, she thought I'd back down, until the night her car vanished for good and her power crumbled with it. It started with little annoyances. Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA, parked her shiny Lexus across my driveway, just for a minute, except her minutes stretched into hours. I couldn't get to work on time, couldn't back out for groceries, and once missed my daughter's recital because her car was wedged like a blockade. When I confronted her, she smirked. HOA bylaws don't mention driveway access, only street parking. Maybe you should read the rules before complaining. The arrogance in her tone burned deeper than her words. She wanted control, and blocking me was her way of proving it. Instead of apologizing, Karen doubled down. She slipped violation notices into my mailbox. Weeds too tall, trash cans left out too long, citing not up to community standards. It was all fabricated, but the threats stacked up, letters promising fines, legal action, even liens. Meanwhile, her car grew bolder, sometimes sideways across my driveway, daring me to fight back. Neighbors whispered, "That's just Karen. She's been like this for years." But no one dared to cross her. I decided then, I wouldn't just fight. I'd win. The night I finally snapped came without warning. It was just past midnight when my wife clutched her stomach and gasped, her face pale and drenched in sweat. "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. Her contractions had started weeks early. My heart hammered as I grabbed the hospital bag we had packed, just in case. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. I rushed to get her into the car, only to freeze in horror. Karen's Lexus was parked sideways across my driveway again. I stared at it, disbelief quickly turning into rage. The headlights from my own car bounced against the shiny black paint of her luxury SUV, mocking me. My wife let out a cry of pain behind me. "Call 911, she gasped. "Now!" I pulled out my phone, fumbling as I dialed. But fury overtook me, hot and blinding. I stormed up to Karen's house, pounding on her front door so hard the wood rattled. "Karen, move your damn car!" I screamed. The sound echoed through the neighborhood, but the door stayed shut. Lights flicked on inside. I saw the shadows of movement through her curtains. She was awake, she was there, but she didn't come out. My wife cried out again from the car, a sound that cut through me like a blade. I roared and kept pounding until my fists ached. Still, no answer. The ambulance sirens finally broke the silence, red and blue lights flashing against the dark houses. Paramedics rushed out, lifting my wife onto a stretcher while I stood helpless, shaking with adrenaline. "Sir, follow us to the hospital," one of them barked. I couldn't. My car was trapped. I watched the ambulance speed away with my wife inside, while I remained rooted in place, staring at Karen's Lexus. I wanted to smash the windows, drag the car into the street with my bare hands, anything, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something colder take root inside me, deeper than anger. Hours later, in the hospital, I sat by my wife's bed. She looked exhausted, her face pale, but she smiled faintly as she held our newborn son in her arms. His tiny chest rose and fell as he slept, fragile yet alive. I reached out and touched his hand. It was so small, so impossibly delicate, curling around my finger. Something inside me hardened in that moment. I leaned close to him, my voice a whisper. "I promise you this," I said. "She will never block our life again. Never." The words tasted like iron on my tongue, part vow, part curse. And for the first time, I knew exactly what had to be done. Revenge wasn't enough. I wanted permanence. Something Karen couldn't undo with a smug grin or a lawyer's letter. The sting of her betrayal still burned. Years of neighborly disputes, her cutting remarks about my yard, my dog, my life, all culminating in her petition to get my fence torn down over a 6-inch property line dispute. She'd won that round, but I wasn't done. This time, I'd hit her where it hurt. Her precious Lexus, her pride and joy, always parked like she owned the whole damn street. I started small, observing her like a hawk. Every Thursday night, without fail, Karen came home late from her fancy country club, her laughter echoing down the quiet cul-de-sac. She'd stumble out of her car, tipsy on overpriced wine, and leave her Lexus parked at an obnoxious angle, half on my driveway, half on the street, blocking the sidewalk and daring anyone to complain. It wasn't just carelessness. It was a power move, a middle finger to everyone who wasn't Karen. Mostly me. I began documenting it. Every Thursday, I'd snap photos from my porch, time-stamped and precise. The Lexus's bumper kissing my driveway, the tires on the sidewalk, the way it blocked the fire hydrant access just enough to be a problem. I kept a log, dates, times, angles. Evidence. Karen thought she was untouchable, but I was building a case. I spent nights poring over city ordinances, tow laws, and property lines, my laptop screen glowing in the dark as I sipped cold coffee. The municipal code was dry as hell, but I read it like a thriller novel, hunting for a weapon. And then I found it. Section July 1st, 12, buried in the city's traffic code. Any vehicle obstructing emergency access, including but not limited to fire hydrants, may be towed at the owner's expense without prior notice. No notice. No warning. Just gone. The fire hydrant was 10 feet from my driveway, and Karen's Lexus was practically humping it every Thursday night. This was my loophole, my silver bullet. But I had to be careful. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was connected. Her husband was some mid-level exec at a law firm downtown, and she name-dropped city council members like they were her book club buddies. If I played this wrong, she'd have her lawyer on me faster than I could say, tow truck. I needed timing, proof, and a little help to make it stick. First, the timing. Thursday nights were perfect. Karen was predictable, and her tipsy state meant she wouldn't notice details. The street was quiet, most neighbors asleep, and the tow company I'd scoped out operated 24/7. They didn't ask questions if the paperwork was clean. I'd call it in, report an obstructing vehicle, and let the city code do the rest. By the time Karen woke up, her Lexus would be in an impound lot across town, and she'd be out a few $100 to get it back. Maybe more if they scratched it. Proof was already in my hands. My photo log was meticulous, a digital shrine to Karen's bad parking. I'd even borrowed a friend's drone to get aerial shots one night, capturing the Lexus's exact position relative to the hydrant. Undeniable. If Karen tried to fight it, I'd have a stack of evidence thicker than her ego. The help was trickier. I couldn't do this alone, not entirely. I needed someone to corroborate the complaint, to make it look like a concerned citizen's report rather than a personal vendetta. Enter Mrs. Callahan, the sweet old widow across the street. She'd hated Karen ever since the petition drama, when Karen had accidentally backed over her rose bushes during a heated HOA meeting. Mrs. Callahan didn't need much convincing. Over tea and my homemade snickerdoodles, I laid out the plan. She'd back me up, say she saw the car blocking the hydrant, maybe even call it in herself for extra cover. Her only condition? She wanted to watch the tow truck haul that Lexus away. I promised her a front row seat. The plan was coming together, but I couldn't shake the itch that it wasn't enough. A tow was humiliating, sure, but Karen would pay the fine, get her car back, and probably spin it into a sob story for her wine and cheese crowd. I needed something more, something that would linger. That's when I remembered the impound lot's reputation. It wasn't just the fees, it was the chaos. Cars got misplaced, paperwork got lost, and sometimes vehicles sat for days before owners could retrieve them. If I timed it right, say, late Thursday before a holiday weekend, Karen might be without her precious Lexus for days. Maybe longer. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the wall. The plan was solid, but it felt cold. Clinical. Part of me wanted to escalate, to make it personal. Key her car, maybe, or leave a note under her wiper calling her out. But that was sloppy, emotional. This wasn't about a quick jab. It was about precision. A surgical strike. Karen would wake up to an empty driveway, a tone notice, and no one to blame but herself. I marked the next Thursday on my calendar, 2 weeks out. Labor Day weekend was coming, and the impound lot would be a nightmare. Perfect. I'd call the tow company at 1 a.m. when Karen was snoring off her Pinot Noir. Mrs. Callahan would be ready with her statement. The photos were already backed up on a flash drive, just in case. For the first time in months, I smiled. Karen thought she'd won when my fence came down. She had no idea what was coming. The Thursday before Labor Day weekend arrived, and I was ready. My plan had been honed to a razor's edge, every detail accounted for, every contingency mapped out. I'd spent the last 2 weeks tying up loose ends, ensuring nothing could trace back to me. The photos of Karen's Lexus blocking the fire hydrant were backed up on an encrypted flash drive, tucked safely in my lockbox. Mrs. Callahan was on board, her indignation at Karen's Rosebush massacre making her a willing accomplice. She'd agreed to make the initial call to the tow company, her voice frail, but convincing as the concerned neighbor, reporting an obstruction. But the real stroke of genius wasn't the tow itself. It was where the car was going. I'd found Reggie, a grizzled scrapyard owner on the outskirts of town, through a mutual friend who knew about my feud with Karen. Reggie was a man of few words, but plenty of grudges, especially against HOA types like Karen who'd once tried to shut down his business over unsightly aesthetics. When I explained my plan over a beer at his cluttered office, his eyes lit up. "You want that Lexus gone?" he'd asked, a crooked grin spreading across his face. I nodded. No impound lot. No fees. No chance for Karen to retrieve her precious car. Reggie's scrapyard had a crusher that could turn a luxury SUV into a metal pancake in under a minute. For a couple $100 and a promise to keep his name out of it, he was in. That night, I sat on my porch, a thermos of black coffee keeping me sharp. The street was quiet, the air thick with the late summer hum of cicadas. At 12:47 a.m., Karen's Lexus rolled in, right on schedule. She parked it with her usual disregard, half across my driveway, the rear bumper practically kissing the fire hydrant. She stumbled out, her heels clicking unevenly on the pavement, giggling to herself as she fumbled with her keys. I waited until she disappeared inside her house, the lights flicking off one by one. Then I texted Reggie, now. The tow truck was a ghost in the night, a nondescript rig with no company logo, just as Reggie had promised. It glided silently down the street, its driver a shadow in a baseball cap. I watched from the darkened porch, my phone's camera ready in case I needed to document anything. Mrs. Callahan was at her window across the street, her silhouette barely visible behind the curtains, probably grinning as wide as I was. The driver hooked up the Lexus with practiced efficiency. Chain secured, wheels lifted, engine purring softly. Within 4 minutes, the car was gone, vanishing into the night like it had never existed. I checked my watch. 1:02 a.m. perfect. Reggie had assured me the Lexus wouldn't see sunrise. His crew worked fast, stripping anything valuable, tires, rims, the fancy leather seats, before feeding the husk to the crusher. By dawn, it would be a cube of scrap metal, untraceable, destined for a barge headed who knows where. No VIN, no plates, no evidence. Karen's pride and joy would be reduced to a memory, and I'd be sipping coffee on my porch, innocent as ever. I barely slept that night, not out of guilt but anticipation. At 6:30 a.m., I was back on my porch, pretending to read the paper. Karen's scream shattered the morning calm at 7:12. She burst out her front door in a silk robe, her hair a mess, staring at the empty spot where her Lexus should have been. "What the hell?" she shrieked, spinning in circles like a confused dog. She marched to the curb, looking up and down the street, then pulled out her phone, jabbing at it with shaking fingers. I kept my eyes on the paper, biting back a smile. Mrs. Callahan played her part perfectly. She shuffled out in her slippers, feigning shock. "Oh, Karen, dear, what happened?" she called, her voice dripping with concern. Karen ranted about thieves, vandals, the incompetence of the police. Mrs. Callahan nodded sympathetically, then mentioned she'd seen some truck in the night, probably a tow for that bad parking job near the hydrant. Karen froze, her face a mix of rage and panic. She stormed back inside, already dialing her lawyer. The police showed up an hour later, 2 bored officers taking her statement. I watched from my window as Karen gestured wildly, pointing at the hydrant, my driveway, even Mrs. Callahan's house. The officers nodded, scribbled notes, and left without so much as a glance my way. There was no tow record with the city. Reggie's guy operated off the books. No security cameras on our street, thanks to Karen's own campaign against them for privacy reasons. No witnesses, except Mrs. Callahan, who'd already told the cops her story about the mystery tow truck. By noon, Karen was pacing her lawn, screaming into her phone at her husband, her insurance company, anyone who'd listen. "It's a $70,000 car. It doesn't just vanish," she yelled. But it had, and I knew it wasn't coming back. I leaned back in my chair, the morning sun warm on my face. The plan had worked flawlessly. Karen could call every lawyer in town, but there was no trail to follow, no evidence to point to me. To the world, her Lexus had simply vanished, a mystery she'd never solve. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of her smugness lift. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice, served cold and permanent. The sun was barely up when Karen's voice pierced the morning calm, a high-pitched wail that could have shattered glass. "Someone stole my car. Who would dare do this?" She stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, her silk robe flapping in the breeze, arms flailing like a conductor gone rogue. Neighbors peeked through curtains, some stepping onto their porches, drawn by the spectacle of Karen's meltdown. Her face was blotchy, her hair a tangled mess, and her eyes darted wildly, searching for someone to blame. I watched from my kitchen window, sipping coffee, my expression as neutral as the beige siding on my house. Inside, I was grinning. Karen's Lexus was gone, crushed into oblivion at Reggie's scrapyard, and there wasn't a shred of evidence to tie it to me. My plan had been surgical, clean, precise, and untraceable. Mrs. Callahan had played her part, planting the seed about a mystery tow truck blocking the fire hydrant. The street had no cameras, thanks to Karen's own crusade against them years ago, citing invasion of privacy. Irony tasted better than my coffee. By 7:30 a.m., Karen was pacing the sidewalk, her phone glued to her ear, shouting at what I assumed was her husband or her insurance agent. "It's a $70,000 car. You don't understand. It doesn't just disappear." Her voice cracked, teetering between rage and desperation. She spun toward Mrs. Callahan, who was watering her geraniums with the serenity of a saint. "Margaret, you saw something, didn't you? You said there was a truck. Tell me." Mrs. Callahan, bless her, didn't miss a beat. "Oh, Karen, dear, I only saw some tow truck last night. Probably because your car was blocking that hydrant again. You know how strict the city is about that." Karen's jaw dropped, her eyes narrowing as if Mrs. Callahan had personally betrayed her. I had to turn away to hide my smirk. The police arrived at 8:15, two officers in a cruiser pulling up with the enthusiasm of men who'd rather be at a donut shop. Karen practically threw herself at them, gesturing wildly at the empty spot where her Lexus had been. "It was stolen. Right here. Someone targeted me." The officers exchanged a glance, the kind that said they'd heard this story 100 times. I stepped outside, my demeanor calm, almost neighborly. "Everything okay, officers?" I asked, just loud enough for Karen to hear. She shot me a glare that could have melted steel, but I kept my face pleasantly blank. One officer, a stocky guy with a mustache, approached me. "You know anything about a missing vehicle, sir?" I nodded toward my front door. "I've got security camera footage that might help." Karen's car was parked across my driveway again last night, blocking the fire hydrant access. I'd installed a cheap camera a week ago, angled perfectly to catch Karen's parking sins without showing the tow truck's arrival. It was a calculated move, one I'd planned after studying the angles from my drone footage. The camera showed exactly what I wanted. Karen's Lexus, parked illegally, time-stamped at 12:50 a.m. I invited the officers inside, set up my laptop, and played the footage. The grainy video showed the Lexus, its bumper jutting over my driveway line, the fire hydrant partially obscure behind it. "City code says that's an emergency access violation," I said, keeping my tone matter of fact. "I didn't call it in, but someone must have. Maybe a neighbor got fed up." The mustached officer nodded, jotting notes. "Yeah, that's a towable offense. No notice required if it's blocking emergency access." His partner, a younger guy with a buzz cut, shrugged. "Sounds like it got towed. Happens sometimes." "Ma'am," he called to Karen, who was hovering near my porch. "You check with the city impound yet?" Karen's face turned purple. "The impound? You think my car was towed?" This was theft. Someone targeted me. The officers didn't flinch. Mustache guy handed her a card. Call the city tow line. If it's not there, we'll file a theft report, but this looks like a parking violation tow to me. They climbed back into their cruiser, filed their report, and drove off, leaving Karen standing in my driveway, fuming. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You," she hissed. "You had something to do with this, didn't you?" I raised my hands, the picture of innocence. "Karen, I just showed the cops the footage. You parked illegally. Again, maybe check with the city before you start pointing fingers." She stormed off, muttering about lawyers and lawsuits, but I knew she had nothing. Reggie's tow guy was a ghost, and the scrapyard had already turned her Lexus into a metal cube. The city's tow records would show nothing. Reggie's operation was strictly off the books. Karen could scream all she wanted, but she was chasing a phantom. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast. Karen's car was gone, and she was blaming everyone from me to the mailman. The HOA board, usually her loyal fan club, was conspicuously silent. Karen had alienated them over the years with her endless demands, finding people for unapproved mailbox colors, pushing for bans on unsightly garden gnomes, even trying to get the community pool closed because she didn't like kids splashing near a lounge chair. Her petition to tear down my fence had been the last straw for many. Now, with her Lexus mysteriously gone, the board wasn't rushing to her defense. At the emergency HOA meeting that evening, called at Karen's insistence, the air was thick with tension. The meeting was held in the community center, a stuffy room with folding chairs and a flickering fluorescent light. Karen stood at the front, her arms crossed, demanding answers. "Someone in this neighborhood is responsible," she declared, her voice shaking. "I want a full investigation, security cameras, witness statements, everything." The board president, a tired-looking man named Carl, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Karen, the police already looked into it. Your car was parked illegally, and the city code allows for immediate towing in those cases. We don't have jurisdiction over municipal towing." Karen's face contorted. "This wasn't a tow. It was theft, and I know who's behind it." Her eyes locked onto me. Sitting in the back row, my hands folded calmly in my lap. A few heads turned, but I didn't flinch. Carl raised a hand. "Unless you have evidence, Karen, we can't accuse anyone. And frankly, you've been warned about your parking before. The rules apply to everyone." A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. Mrs. Callahan, sitting near me, coughed to hide a chuckle. Karen's jaw tightened, but she had no comeback. For years, she'd weaponized the HOA's rules against the rest of us. Fines for overgrown lawns, complaints about holiday lights left up too long, that damn petition about my fence. Now, the same rules she'd wielded like a club had turned on her. The board didn't defend her, didn't offer sympathy. They just moved on to the next agenda item, a proposal for new playground equipment. Karen sat down, her shoulders slumping, her usual swagger gone. As the meeting ended, I caught snippets of conversation from neighbors. About time she got a taste of her own medicine, one whispered. "Bet she'll think twice before blocking driveways again," another said. Mrs. Callahan sidled up to me as we walked out. "Nice work," she murmured, her eyes twinkling. I didn't see a thing, of course. I gave her a small nod, my face still neutral. Of course. That night, I sat on my porch, the cul-de-sac quiet again. Karen's house was dark, her usual porch light off. I imagined her inside, still on the phone with her lawyer, her husband, her insurance company, trying to make sense of a car that had vanished without a trace. She'd probably file a claim, maybe even get a payout, but it wouldn't replace the feeling of invincibility she'd lost. For the first time in years, Karen looked powerless, stripped of her armor, her arrogance exposed as fragile as glass. I leaned back, the cool night air brushing my face. The neighborhood felt different, lighter, like a weight had lifted. Karen could rebuild, maybe buy another car, but she'd never park it the same way again. She'd hesitate, second-guess, look over her shoulder. And that was enough. My plan hadn't just taken her Lexus. It had taken her certainty, her control. Permanence, just like I'd wanted. Weeks slipped by, each one quieter than the last. My driveway stayed clear, an open expanse of asphalt unmarred by the crooked bumper of Karen's Lexus. My mailbox, once stuffed with her passive-aggressive notices about my lawn or my dog's barking, now held only bills and the occasional flyer. The cul-de-sac, once a battleground for Karen's petty HOA crusades, felt calm, almost serene. Her reign of terror, built on years of complaints, petitions, and that smug grin, was crumbling, and I savored every second of it. Karen's new car appeared about a month after the Lexus vanished. A rusty old sedan, a beige relic from the 90s with a dented fender, and a muffler that coughed like a lifelong smoker. It was a far cry from her gleaming SUV, and she parked it meticulously in her own driveway, never daring to encroach on mine or anyone else's. The fire hydrant, once her weekly parking target, stood unobstructed. I catch her glancing at it sometimes, her lips pursed, as if it had personally betrayed her. The sight made my coffee taste better. She didn't speak to me anymore, not directly. No more storming across the street to lecture me about my fence, now rebuilt thanks to a revised HOA vote, or my son's tricycle left on the lawn. But I'd see her watching me from her porch, her eyes narrow with suspicion, searching for proof that never existed. Once, as I mowed my lawn, she stood at her mailbox, arms crossed, staring so hard I could feel it. I waved cheerfully, my smile as bright as the noon sun. She turned away, her shoulders stiff, and disappeared inside. She knew I'd had something to do with her car's disappearance, but knowing and proving were two different things, and I'd left her nothing to work with. The neighborhood had changed in subtle ways. Mrs. Callahan's roses bloomed brighter, as if they sensed Karen's diminished presence. Neighbors who'd once ducked their heads to avoid her wrath now chatted openly on the sidewalk, their voices free of the tension her name used to carry. At the next HOA meeting, Karen sat in the back, silent, her usual barrage of complaints absent. When Carl, the board president, mentioned updating parking rules to avoid future incidents, her face flushed, but she didn't speak. The board approved the measure unanimously, and I caught a few knowing glances exchanged among the neighbors. Karen's grip on the HOA, once ironclad, was slipping through her fingers like sand. I'd expected her to fight harder, to unleash her lawyer husband or her city council connections, but she didn't. Maybe she was tired. Maybe her insurance payout, likely less than she'd hoped, given the mysterious circumstances, had drained her energy. Or maybe, deep down, she knew she'd pushed too far for too long. Whatever the reason, her silence was deafening, and it was sweet. My son, Liam, noticed the change too, in his own way. At 5, he didn't understand the intricacies of neighbor feuds or scrapped cars, but he sensed the shift. "Daddy, why doesn't the mean lady yell anymore?" he asked one morning, his small hands clutching a juice box as we sat on the porch. I ruffled his hair. "She's just learning to be a better neighbor, buddy." He grinned, then pedaled off on his tricycle, weaving freely across the driveway that was ours again. Watching him, I felt a warmth settle in my chest. This was why I'd done it. Not just for revenge, but for permanence. For a home where Liam could grow up without Karen's shadow looming over us, her rules dictating our every move. The scrapyard plan had been a risk, but it was worth it. Reggie had kept his word, and the Lexus was long gone, its parts scattered across who knows where, its frame reduced to a metal cube on a barge headed for some distant recycling plant. No paper trail, no witnesses, no trace. The tow truck driver, a friend of Reggie's, had vanished into the night as quietly as he'd arrived. Mrs. Callahan's concerned citizen call to the tow company was the only record, and it led to a dead end. The police had closed their theft report weeks ago, citing insufficient evidence. Karen could glare all she wanted, but she was grasping at air. Sometimes, I'd catch myself replaying the night it happened. The silent tow truck, the Lexus disappearing into the dark, Mrs. Callahan's conspiratorial wink. It wasn't glee exactly, but satisfaction, deep and steady. I'd outmaneuvered Karen, not with her tactics of loud complaints and legal threats, but with precision and patience. She'd built her empire on intimidation, but I dismantled it with a single, silent strike. One evening, As the sun dipped low, painting the cul-de-sac in hues of orange and pink, I backed my car out of the driveway. It glided smoothly, no obstacles, no crooked SUVs blocking my path. I glanced at Karen's house, her sedan parked neatly, her porch light dim. She was out there, sweeping her steps, her movements slow, almost defeated. Our eyes met for a moment, and I nodded, just once, the smallest acknowledgement. She froze, her broom still, then turned away. I drove off, the road clear ahead of me. Some battles, I realized, weren't fought in courtrooms or HOA meetings. They weren't won with shouts or signatures. They were won in the quiet moments, in the absence of conflict, in a space you carved out for yourself when the tyrant finally fell. One crushed Lexus at a time, I'd reclaim my home, my peace, my son's freedom to ride his tricycle without fear of a neighbor's wrath. And every morning, when I backed out of my driveway with ease, I smiled. The silence was sweeter than any victory speech. Karen wasn't the type to fade into the background, licking her wounds in silence. The loss of her Lexus, her gleaming badge of superiority, had humiliated her in a way that cut deeper than any fine or HOA reprimand. For someone like Karen, humiliation was blood in the water, and she was a shark, circling, relentless, and hungry for revenge. I'd known she'd come for me, but I hadn't expected her to escalate so quickly or so viciously. It started small, in the weeks following the HOA meeting where the board had quietly rebuked her. She began flooding the HOA with complaints, each one more unhinged than the last. My fence was an eyesore, again, despite being fully compliant with the new rules. My lawn was unkempt, though I mowed it twice a week. She even claimed my son's tricycle, parked neatly in our driveway, was a safety hazard. The board, weary of her antics, dismissed most of her grievances, but the sheer volume was exhausting. Every few days, a new email or handwritten note appeared, accusing me of something new, vandalism, trespassing, even intimidating behavior, for waving at her that one time. She was trying to drown me in paperwork, hoping I'd slip up or give in. Then came the police calls. At least once a week, a cruiser would roll up to my house, usually in the early evening when neighbors were out walking their dogs. Karen's accusations were wild. I was stalking her, she claimed, because I'd been seen mowing my lawn while she was outside. I'd threatened her by installing new security cameras, which she insisted were pointed at her house. They weren't. The officers, the same board duo from the Lexus incident, would listen to her ramble, then knock on my door for a statement. I'd show them my footage, clear, time-stamped evidence of my lawn mowing or my cameras angled solely at my property, and they'd leave, apologizing for the inconvenience. "She's persistent," Mustache Guy said once, shaking his head. "But she's got nothing solid." Still, the constant visits were wearing me down, chipping away at the peace I'd fought so hard to win. My wife, Emily, felt it the most. She'd just given birth to our second child, a daughter named Lily, and the stress of Karen's campaign was fraying her nerves. "Why can't she just leave us alone?" Emily whispered one night, rocking Lily in her arms after another police visit. I didn't have an answer, but I felt the weight of her fear. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a threat to my family's sense of safety. The breaking point came on a chilly October evening, about 2 months after the Lexus vanished. I'd been at work late, finalizing a project, and pulled into the driveway around 9 p.m. The street was dark, the cul-de-sac quiet except for the hum of crickets. As I stepped out of my car, my headlights caught a glint of something wrong. My garage door, usually a pristine white, was defaced with a single word in dripping red spray paint. Thief. The letters were jagged, angry, scrawled in a way that felt personal, like a knife to the gut. Emily was inside, clutching Lily, her face pale as she stared at the vandalism through the living room window. "Who would do this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I knew exactly who. I didn't react right away. Anger surged through me, hot and sharp, but I'd learned from the Lexus plan that emotion was a liability. Karen wanted me to lose control, to confront her, to give her something she could twist into evidence. Instead, I took a deep breath kissed Emily's forehead, and told her to lock the doors. Then I went to work. First, I checked my cameras. The new ones I'd installed after the Lexus incident were high-resolution, motion-activated, and covered every angle of my property. Sure enough, at 8:17 p.m., the footage showed a figure in a dark hoodie creeping up to the garage, a spray can in hand. The hood obscured their face, but the build, the way they moved, hesitant but deliberate, screamed. Karen. She'd park her sedan a block away, out of camera range, but I caught a glimpse of it rolling by earlier, its distinctive dented fender unmistakable. It wasn't ironclad proof, but it was a start. I called the police, not out of panic but strategy. The same officers arrived, their expressions grim as they surveyed the graffiti. Looks personal, Buzz Cutts said, snapping photos. I showed them the footage, pointing out the sedan and the figure's movements. I'm not accusing anyone, I said carefully, but my neighbor's been filing complaints against me for weeks. Might be related. Mustache guy nodded, his eyes narrowing. We'll talk to her. Don't touch the paint until we process it. They left, and I knew Karen would deny everything, but the seed was planted. The next morning, I upgraded my defenses. I ordered 3 more cameras, these with night vision and cloud backup, and had them installed by a professional to ensure no blind spots. I bought a motion sensor floodlight for the driveway, bright enough to wake the whole street if triggered. Emily, still shaken, agreed to let me handle it, but I could see the toll it was taking. I just want to feel safe, she said, cradling Lily. I promised her I'd make it happen. I started building a case, just like I had with Alexis. Every HOA complaint, every police report, every interaction with Karen went into a file. I printed her emails, screenshot her passive-aggressive posts on the neighborhood Facebook group, and saved every frame of my camera footage. I contacted a lawyer friend, not to sue yet, but to understand my options. He suggested a restraining order if I could prove harassment, but warned me to keep my hands clean. She's baiting you, he said. Don't give her an opening. Karen's attacks didn't stop. She escalated her HOA complaints, now claiming my new cameras were spying on the neighborhood. She tried rallying neighbors, knocking on doors with a petition to investigate me for the Lexus theft. Most slammed their doors in her face. Mrs. Callahan, ever my ally, spread word that Karen was unhinged, her story about the stolen car falling apart under scrutiny. The police visited her again about the graffiti, but she played the victim, claiming she was being targeted. Without a clear shot of her face, they couldn't charge her, but the officer's patience was thinning. Then came the second vandalism. A week after the graffiti, I found my mailbox smashed, the metal crumpled like paper. The cameras caught nothing this time. The culprit had approached from a blind spot I hadn't yet covered. I cursed myself for the oversight, but installed another camera that same day. Emily was on edge, barely sleeping, and I knew I had to end this before it spiraled further. I doubled down on documentation. Every morning, I checked the footage, saving anything suspicious. A shadow moving near Karen's house, her sedan circling the block late at night. I started a log of her police calls, cross-referencing dates with the officers' visits. I even reached out to Reggie, asking if he'd heard anything about Karen sniffing around his scrapyard. Nada, he said, chuckling. Her car's long gone, man. She's got no clue. His confidence steadied me. Karen was swinging wildly, but she was hitting air. The turning point came at the next HOA meeting, 3 weeks after the graffiti. Karen showed up, her eyes bloodshot, her usual polish replaced by a manic edge. She demanded a vote to fine me for harassment and property damage, waving a stack of papers she claimed were evidence. Carl, the board president, cut her off. Karen, you filed 17 complaints against this man in 2 months. None have been substantiated. The police say the same. Unless you have concrete proof, this stops now. The room was silent, neighbors shifting uncomfortably. Mrs. Callahan spoke up, her voice steady. Maybe we should be looking at your behavior, Karen. Defacing property isn't exactly neighborly. A few gasps, then murmurs of agreement. Karen's face crumpled, and she stormed out. That night, I sat with Emily, Lily asleep in her crib, Liam coloring quietly in the next room. She's not going to stop, Emily said, her voice small. I took her hand. She will. I'm not reacting. I'm building a case. She's burying herself. My lawyer friend had already drafted a cease and desist letter, citing harassment and defamation. If Karen kept going, we'd push for a restraining order. Every move she made, every complaint, every spray-painted word was another nail in her coffin. I looked out at the dark cul-de-sac, the new floodlight casting a stark glow over my driveway. Karen's sedan was parked in her garage, her porch light off. She was still out there, plotting, but I was ready. Her obsession was her weakness, and I'd let her unravel, one mistake at a time. The silence-eyed one wasn't gone yet. It was just waiting, patient as I was, for Karen to fall for good. The air in the neighborhood clubhouse was thick with tension, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your pulse quicken. The HOA board had called a special session after Karen's relentless campaign of complaints and vandalism accusations reached a fever pitch. Word had spread fast. Neighbors whispered about her outbursts, her wild claims, and the spray-painted thief on my garage door. By 7 p.m., the cramped room was packed, folding chairs overflowing with every resident in the cul-de-sac and beyond. Some stood against the walls, arms crossed, curiosity and frustration etched on their faces. Karen was about to face the community she'd lorded over for years, and I was ready to end this. She stood at the front, her face flushed a deep crimson, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun that seemed to amplify her fury. She clutched a stack of papers, her so-called evidence, and jabbed a manicured finger in my direction, her voice shrill enough to rattle the cheap chandelier above. "He stole my car," she shouted, her eyes locking onto me where I sat in the third row, calm as a still pond. "He's a menace, a criminal. We can't have people like him in our community, tearing us apart." Her voice cracked, teetering between rage and desperation. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded, her loyalists still clinging to her narrative. She'd ruled the HOA for so long, some couldn't imagine questioning her. I didn't flinch. My hands rested in my lap, my expression neutral, though inside I was coiled tight, ready to strike. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, compiling evidence, refining my strategy. Karen thought she could bury me with accusations, but she'd overplayed her hand. The board, usually her puppets, sat stone-faced behind a folding table, their eyes darting between her and me. Carl, the president, adjusted his glasses, his voice weary. "Karen, you've made serious allegations. We'll hear you out, but we're also giving him a chance to respond. Let's keep this civil." Karen scoffed, tossing her papers onto the table. "Civil? He's a thief. My Lexus is gone because of him, and now he's got cameras everywhere, spying on us. He's terrorizing this neighborhood." She pointed at me again, her finger trembling. A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding in her favor, others rolling their eyes. Mrs. Callahan, sitting beside me, patted my arm discreetly, her lips twitching with a suppressed smile. She'd seen this coming. Carl raised a hand. "Enough. We'll hear from him now." All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, deliberately, and wheeled a small projector I'd borrowed from work onto a table in the center of the room. I'd spent hours editing the footage from my cameras, stitching together a timeline that would dismantle Karen's empire in minutes. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said, my voice steady, loud enough to carry. "I've got some evidence of my own to share. Let's clear the air." I plugged in my laptop, dimmed the lights, and started the presentation. The first clip played. Karen's Lexus parked across my driveway on a Thursday night, its rear bumper blocking the fire hydrant. The timestamp glowed in the corner, 12:50 a.m., the night it disappeared. "This was a regular occurrence," I said, keeping my tone factual. "Karen parked like this every week, blocking emergency access. City code allows for immediate towing in these cases, no notice required." A few neighbors nodded, recalling their own frustrations with her parking. The next clip showed Karen at the HOA meeting 2 years ago, berating Mrs. Callahan over her rose bushes. "They're an eyesore." Karen's voice barked from the screen, her face twisted with disdain. "We have standards." Mrs. Callahan stiffened beside me, and a few neighbors gasped, remembering the incident. The clip cut to Karen threatening another neighbor, Mr. Patel, over his holiday lights. "Take them down, or I'll fine you myself," she snapped. Whispers spread through the room. Karen's loyalists looked uneasy, their faith in her wavering. Then came the damning footage. A grainy night vision clip from my new cameras showing a hooded figure spray painting thief across my garage door. The figure's face was obscured, but the sedan parked a block away, its dented fender clearly visible, was unmistakable. "This was taken the night my garage was vandalized," I said. "That's Karen's car. Same dent, same color." The room buzzed, heads turning toward Karen. She opened her mouth to protest, but I pressed on. The final clip was the knockout punch. It was from a neighbor's doorbell camera, one Karen hadn't known about, capturing a conversation she'd had with her husband on their porch a week after the Lexus vanished. The audio was faint but clear enough. "I'll make his life hell until he leaves," Karen said, laughing bitterly. "He thinks he's clever, but I'll ruin him." The screen froze on her smirk, and the silence in the room was deafening. Even her staunchest supporters looked away, their faces tight with shock or shame. I turned off the projector and faced the crowd. "I didn't steal her car," I said. "The evidence suggests it was towed for blocking a fire hydrant," as the police concluded. "But Karen's been harassing my family. Vandalism, false police reports, endless complaints. My wife is scared to sleep at night. My kids don't feel safe. This has to stop." I sat down, my heart pounding, but my face calm. Mrs. Callahan squeezed my hand under the table. Karen leapt to her feet, her voice a screech. "Lies. That's fabricated. He's framing me." But her words fell flat. The board exchanged glances, and Carl cleared his throat. "Karen, we've seen enough. This behavior, your behavior, is unacceptable. We're moving to a vote." He turned to the board members. "Given the evidence and ongoing complaints from multiple residents, I propose we remove Karen as HOA president, effective immediately." The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's eyes widened, her mouth working soundlessly. One of her allies, a pinch-faced woman named Linda, tried to object. "This is unfair. She's done so much for this community." But Mr. Patel stood up, his voice firm. "She's done nothing but bully us. I'm with him." He nodded at me. Others chimed in. Mrs. Callahan, the young couple down the street, even old Mr. Henderson, who rarely spoke. The tide had turned. The vote was swift, 4-1, with Linda as the lone dissenter. Carl banged his gavel, a relic from some thrift store, and declared, "Karen is removed as HOA president. We'll hold elections for a new president next month." Karen stood frozen, her papers clutched to her chest, her face a mask of disbelief. The crowd began to disperse, some neighbors patting my shoulder as they passed, others avoiding Karen's gaze. She stormed out, her heels clicking furiously on the linoleum. That night, I sat with Emily on our couch, Lily asleep in her crib, Liam tucked into bed. The cul-de-sac was quiet, the floodlight outside casting a protective glow. "Is it over?" Emily asked, her voice soft but hopeful. I squeezed her hand. "It's close. She's got no power now." Karen's empire had collapsed in front of everyone, her own words and actions her undoing. My cameras were still rolling, my case against her growing. If she struck again, I'd be ready. As I locked the front door, I glanced at Karen's house. Her sedan was in the garage, her porch light off. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like mine again, not hers. The silence wasn't just sweet now, it was triumphant. Karen had swung, and I'd knock her out with her own mistakes. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It wasn't the uneasy silence that had haunted our house for months, the kind that made every creak of the floorboards feel like a warning. This was different. Clean, still, whole. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could step outside my front door in the morning and not brace myself for battle. No more threatening letters folded into my mailbox. No more neon slips slapped on my door claiming I'd violated some imaginary regulation. No more shadows of Karen's Lexus stretching across my driveway like a chain. The weeks after her downfall felt like stepping into a new world. The neighborhood itself seemed to breathe differently. Kids played on the sidewalks again, without their parents worrying about Karen's shrill voice barking at them for leaving a scooter on common ground. The couples who once whispered their agreement with her in HOA meetings now avoided her completely, as if she carried some contagious stain of shame. The ones who had stayed quiet during my war with her, those who looked away whenever I needed help, suddenly offered polite nods and nervous smiles when I passed. But I didn't return them. Respect earned under the shadow of fear was worth nothing. Sometimes I'd see her old sedan limping down the road. The Lexus was gone. No more polished symbol of her reign, no more gleaming weapon parked across my life. In its place, the tired groan of a rust-colored car that looked ready to give out. The windows were always rolled tight, her face pale behind the glass. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She didn't dare meet anyone's eyes. The self-appointed queen had become a ghost, and that suited me just fine. For the first time since moving here, my family could breathe. My wife no longer jumped at the sound of a knock at the door, bracing for another shouting match. She tended the little garden by the porch in peace, humming softly as our son, now growing, stronger every day, laughed and reached for the flowers she held up to him. I'd fought, not just for a clear driveway, but for something larger. For peace, for respect, for my son's future. But peace, I learned, isn't just the absence of war. It's the presence of something more powerful, freedom. Every morning, when sunlight spilled across my driveway, I felt it. The small, simple victory of open space. The absence of her shadow. The fulfillment of the promise I made in that hospital room, staring down at my newborn son with fury in my chest and love in my veins. I had told him no one would block us again, and I had kept that promise. Still, there were moments when the weight of everything pressed against me. When I sat alone on the porch at night, watching the streetlights glow against the pavement, I would replay everything in my head. The pounding on Karen's door while my wife cried out in pain, the mocking laughter at the HOA meetings, the sight of her smug face leaning against her Lexus as if it were a throne. And then I'd remember the crack in her voice the night everything fell apart for her. The way she stumbled in that final meeting, exposed in front of the neighbors who once followed her. How quickly loyalty dissolved when truth was projected on the walls for all to see. Power built on fear always collapses. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of her in the grocery store. She'd shuffle down an aisle, head bowed, clutching coupons instead of wielding fines. The old Karen, the one who could silence a room with a glare, was gone. In her place was someone smaller, someone no one listened to anymore. And yet, I never confronted her again, never gloated, never reminded her of what she'd done to us. I didn't need to. Her downfall was her punishment, and her isolation was her prison. But inside me, a darker truth lived on. Karen thought she could control me with her car, with her rules, with her constant pressure. She thought she could chip away at me until I broke. And for a while, I almost believed she could. But she forgot one thing. When you push a good man too far, when you threaten what he loves most, something inside him hardens. That night in the hospital, holding my son, I crossed a line. I became someone else. Someone who understood that peace doesn't come by asking. It comes by taking back what's yours, by refusing to bow, by ensuring that the shadow that once stood over you is ground into dust. Now, when I walk outside in the morning, the air tastes sharper, freer. The driveway lies empty, the sun striking it clean. My wife stands by the porch with coffee in hand, our son wriggling in her arms, his laughter echoing across the yard. And sometimes, as I hold them close, I glance down the street. Karen's old sedan crawls past every now and then, her face a pale blur behind the glass. Forgotten, defeated, a relic of what once was. I don't smile. I don't wave. I simply turn back to my family. Because in the end, she was wrong. She thought she could block me, control me, cage me. But I proved one thing. When you push a good man too far, sometimes the car isn't the only thing that disappears. Sometimes the whole empire crumbles with it. And when it does, peace is the only thing left standing.